There's a transformation, a shift, that happens so gradually, so subtly, most people completely miss it. It unfolds silently, beneath the surface of the everyday grind, like the slow changing of the seasons. And then one day, you realize something profound has changed. You realize that the person you used to be has quietly stepped aside, making room for the more authentic, conscious you that's emerging. I'm talking about the habits, the ingrained patterns, that consciously aware people slowly, almost imperceptibly, begin to let go of, not through brute force, not through rigid discipline, not through sheer willpower alone, but through a natural, almost effortless, falling away. That happens as your awareness expands, as you wake up to who you truly are. Eckhart Tolle, that brilliant spiritual teacher, he's spoken about this transformative process in a way that few others have. He wisely points out that as our awareness grows, conditioned patterns, old habits, they don't just magically disappear overnight, they have momentum. Years of being practiced and reinforced, they may even continue for a while, even as our presence, our consciousness, begins to blossom. But something shifts. You begin to notice these patterns, to observe them. You become the witness, the silent observer, of behaviors that used to run your life completely unconsciously, on autopilot. And in that very act of noticing, in bringing awareness to the unconscious, something begins to release, to dissolve. Today, I want to share with you 7 common habits that highly conscious people who are awakening, slowly abandon as they evolve. These aren't things you need to force yourself to stop doing, to beat yourself up about. They're things that naturally fall away, like dead leaves from a tree in autumn, as you become more present, more aware, more deeply rooted in your authentic self. And if you recognize yourself in any of these behaviors, please don't judge yourself harshly. Simply notice, acknowledge. Because as Tolle so beautifully teaches, the very moment you observe the ego, that false self, at work within yourself, you're already beginning to transcend it, to move beyond it. Okay, so the first habit that consciously aware people slowly abandon is the compulsive need to be right now. This might seem like a small thing, a minor character flaw, but trust me, it runs incredibly deep. It's a powerful undercurrent in so many lives, the need to be right, to always have the correct answer. It's one of the ego's most powerful defense mechanisms, its favorite tool. It's how the ego, that false sense of self, maintains its shaky sense of identity, its fragile feeling of superiority, its illusion of control. When you're overly identified with this need to be right, every disagreement, every difference of opinion becomes a threat. It feels personal. Every challenge to your perspective feels like an all-out attack on your very existence, on who you think you are. So you argue, you defend, you dig your heels in deeper, even when a small part of you knows, deep down, that you might actually be wrong. The ego would honestly rather be right and miserable than be at peace and possibly mistaken. But as consciousness awakens, as you start to see through the ego's games, something begins to shift. Inside of you, you start to notice just how exhausting this constant need to be right actually is. It's draining. You notice the physical tension in your body, the clenching in your jaw, the tightness in your shoulders. When you're fiercely defending a position, you notice the subtle disconnection it creates in your relationships, the way it pushes people away, and you start to realize that being right, in the end, rarely brings the deep, lasting satisfaction you expected it would. And slowly, ever so slowly, the ego's grip loosens. It begins to release its hold, not because you've consciously decided to be more agreeable or less assertive, but because you're beginning to see to truly understand that your sense of self, your worth as a human being, is not actually threatened when someone disagrees with you. It's okay. You realize that you can hold your views lightly, with an open hand, open to new information, to different perspectives, without somehow losing yourself in the process. This is a profound, powerful liberation, a doorway to freedom, because the need to be right, ultimately, keeps you imprisoned in a small, limited identity, a tight little box of beliefs. Letting it go, surrendering the need to always be correct, opens you up to the vast, boundless intelligence of presence, of simply being, which is far greater, far wiser than any fixed position you could ever defend. The second habit that slowly, gracefully, falls away as you awaken is the incessant compulsion to judge others. Now, understand, the mind, by its very nature, judges constantly. That's one of its primary functions, its default setting. It categorizes, it evaluates, it compares. Everything, all the time, and in a practical sense. Some of this is actually necessary. You need to make basic judgments about what's safe, what's healthy, what aligns with your core values to navigate daily life. But there's another, much darker, kind of judgment that the ego engages in compulsively, almost addictively. It's the judgment that subtly, or not so subtly, makes you feel superior to others, the better-than mentality, the judgment that puts people in neat, predefined boxes and then dismisses them, often without even knowing them. The judgment that allows you to temporarily feel better about yourself by ruthlessly focusing on the perceived flaws and shortcomings of others. This kind of judgment, this constant mental critique, is an enormous drain on your energy. It's exhausting. It keeps you separate, isolated from the natural flow of life, from the shared human experience, and most importantly, it prevents you from seeing the inherent consciousness, the spark of divinity that animates every single being. As your spiritual awareness deepens, as you begin to wake up, you begin to notice this judgmental tendency arising within yourself. And then something truly amazing happens. You actually start to feel compassion, believe it or not, even for the part of yourself that judges, that feels the need to put others down. You see that this judgment, this negativity, ultimately comes from fear, from deep-seated insecurity, from the ego's desperate, often unconscious, need to maintain its perceived position, its dominance, and in seeing it clearly, in bringing it into the light of awareness, it begins to lose its power, its automatic hold over you. You find yourself looking at others, at strangers, at even the people you dislike differently, not through the harsh, distorting lens of their perceived flaws and failures, but through the lens of recognition, of shared humanity, of empathy. You begin to see the same consciousness, the same spark of divinity, looking back at you from every pair of eyes, the same universal being, the same life force, expressing itself in literally billions of different forms, each unique and precious. Now, this doesn't mean you become naive, or stop using discernment, or suddenly trust everyone you meet. It simply means you stop using judgment as a weapon to elevate yourself, to make yourself feel better at the expense of others. And here's something else about judgment that most people don't fully realize. Every judgment you make about another person, consciously or unconsciously, is really, in a very real way, a judgment about yourself. When you criticize someone for being selfish, you're activating and acknowledging the part of you that knows selfishness, that understands that impulse. When you condemn someone for being arrogant, you're touching and bringing awareness to your own relationship with arrogance, your own feelings of inadequacy. This isn't meant to be a guilt trip or a condemnation. It's simply the nature of projection, the way the human mind works. We tend to see, in others, what already lives, in some form, within ourselves, both the light and the shadow. As this becomes clear, as you recognize this profound truth, judgment naturally, organically, begins to soften. Not because you've forced yourself to be non-judgmental or adopted a new set of rules, but because you're beginning to realize, more and more, that you are always, in every moment, looking into a mirror, reflecting your own inner landscape, and compassion for the reflection, for the person in the mirror, naturally leads to compassion and acceptance. For yourself, the third habit that consciously aware people gradually release is the insidious addiction to complaining. Complaining is so incredibly normalized in our modern culture, so deeply ingrained in our everyday interactions, that most people don't even recognize it as a problem, as a destructive habit. It's just how people talk. It's just how conversations go. What else are you supposed to do? But Eckhart Tolle, again, points out something absolutely crucial about complaining, something that's easy to miss. He reminds us that complaining, at its core, is always a form of non-acceptance of what is, of present reality. When you complain about the weather, about your boss, about the traffic, you're fundamentally resisting reality. You're essentially saying that what is happening should not be happening. You're arguing, not just with the situation, but with life itself. And this internal resistance, this inner battle, inevitably creates suffering, not necessarily because the situation itself is inherently bad, but because your resistance to it, your refusal to accept it, adds a thick, heavy layer of pain on top of whatever's already present. The addiction to complaining also subtly reinforces the ego's victim identity, the feeling of helplessness. It keeps you stuck in a disempowered state, where life is something that constantly happens to you, rather than something that flows through you, something you can co-create. As your presence grows as you become more aware, you begin to notice the distinct energy of complaint, the subtle shift in your inner state. You feel how it contracts your body, how it tightens your chest, how it clouds your mind. You sense how it poisons your state of consciousness, how it drags you down into negativity. You recognize that complaining rarely, if ever, changes anything except your own inner state, and certainly not for the better. And slowly, over time, this deeply ingrained habit begins to dissolve, to unravel, not because you're forcibly suppressing your feelings or trying to be artificially positive, but because you're gradually finding a different, more accepting, more peaceful relationship to what is, to the present moment. You learn to acknowledge challenges, to address problems, without adding the unnecessary weight, the destructive energy of resistance and complaint. You learn to tackle problems without identifying as a victim. This is a fundamental shift, and it transforms not just your inner experience, but your entire relationship with life. There's also a social side to this that's worth diving into. Ever notice how bonding through complaining is like one of the most common ways people connect? People bond over shared gripes, over swapping criticisms, over collectively moaning about the weather, the government, their jobs, their relationships. In the moment, this kind of bonding feels good. It makes you feel like it's us against the world, a feeling of we're all in this together. But it's a solidarity built on negativity. It just fuels the pain body in everyone involved and keeps everyone stuck in a state of unconsciousness. As you become more consciously aware, you might find you just can't participate in those complaint sessions the same way anymore, not because you're judging those who are complaining, but because that complaining energy just doesn't vibe with you anymore. This can feel isolating. At first, you might even lose touch with some people whose relationships were based mostly on that shared negativity. But what comes along in its place is so much more valuable. Connections built on presence, on acceptance, on genuine positivity, instead of that fake solidarity from shared misery. Another habit that starts to fade away is constantly seeking validation from others. This is one of the most common patterns of the mind, the false self. That constant need for others to tell you you're okay, that you're good enough and smart enough, attractive enough, successful enough. Basically, the mind, the false self, is just an image, a mental story. And these stories need constant backup to feel real. So the mind, the false self, is always looking for someone to say, you're okay, through hitting milestones, through piling up stuff, through relationship, through likes and shares on social media. It's exhausting, and it never works. Because no matter how much validation you get from the outside, it can't fill that empty space you feel when you're cut off from your authentic self. As you become more consciously aware, you really start to notice this pattern. You see how much of what you do is driven by the need to be liked, how many of your choices are shaped by fear of being judged, how much energy you burn trying to control what other people think about you. And something inside you starts to question it all. Is this really how I want to live? Spending my life putting on a show for an audience that might not even be watching? Slowly, that need for external validation starts to loosen its grip. Not because you stop caring about other people, but because you find a deeper sense of okayness inside yourself. You realize that your worth doesn't depend on what other people think, that your value is just built into who you are, that the being that you are doesn't need anyone's approval, because it just is. This is one of the most freedom-giving realizations on this journey. And as it sinks in deeper, it sets you free to be yourself in ways you just couldn't be before. The fifth habit that consciously aware people gradually let go of is living in the past or future. This is probably the biggest problem with the human mind. The inability to just be present. That constant mental time travel to moments that are gone, or moments that might never even happen. Most people spend most of their waking hours lost in thoughts about what happened yesterday or what might happen tomorrow, rerunning old arguments, wishing they'd done things differently, worrying about future problems, trying to plan for every little thing. And while some planning is needed, the constant, obsessive thinking isn't. It steals the only moment you really have, in this one, right now. Eckhart Tolle has built his entire teaching on this, that the present moment is all you ever have, that life is always now, that the past and the future only exist as thoughts in your head, not as real things. As you start to get this on a deeper level, you'll start to catch yourself when you're mentally time traveling. You'll notice when your mind has drifted off to that argument you had yesterday, or that meeting you have tomorrow, and just by noticing, you come back to now. This doesn't happen overnight. That habit of living in the past or future is deeply rooted, but little by little, being present becomes easier. You find yourself spending more time just being here, more time actually experiencing life, instead of just thinking about it. And that changes everything. Because when you're present, problems that seemed huge when you were lost in thought just disappear when you're present. You find a peace that no amount of thinking can give you. When you're present, you touch something timeless inside yourself. Here's a cool paradox. The more present you become, the more fully you live. A lot of people are afraid that being present means being passive, that being in the now means not planning or not caring about the future. But it's actually the opposite. When you act from a place of presence, instead of just compulsive thinking, your actions are more effective, more intelligent, more in tune with reality as it really is. You can still plan, you can still have goals, but they come from a place of clarity, not anxiety, from wisdom, not fear, from the intelligence of the present moment, not the confusion of an overactive mind. This is what Tolle calls conscious manifestation. When we try to create from that place of the mind, the false self, we usually feel like something's missing, like we don't have enough. But in conscious manifestation, we create from presence and from a feeling of already being whole. The results might look the same on the outside. but the inner experience is completely different. And, in the end, the results on the outside tend to be better too, because actions that come from presence have a different energy. They flow with life, instead of fighting against it. The sixth habit that slowly fades away is that tendency to take everything personally. The mind, the false self, takes everything personally. It sees everything, every comment, every glance, through the lens of me. What does this say about me? How does this affect me? Why did they do this to me? But as you expand your awareness, you start to see something pretty amazing. Most of what happens has nothing to do with you. People's behavior is just a reflection of what's going on inside them, their own baggage, their own level of awareness. When someone's rude to you, it's usually not about you. When someone rejects you, it's usually not about you. When things don't go your way, it's usually not personal. You can't just believe this and instantly be free. It's a realization that grows over time, as you really watch how the mind and the false self works. You see how quickly it makes up a personal story, out of things that aren't personal at all. You see how much suffering this creates, and gradually, the grip loosens. You find yourself less reactive to what others do or say, less thrown by circumstances that once would have devastated you, not because you have become cold or detached, but because you have stopped making everything about you. This is a profound freedom, because the person who takes everything personally is always vulnerable, always at the mercy of external events. But the person who sees beyond this illusion is rooted in something unshakable. The seventh and final habit that consciously aware people slowly let go of is the identification with their story. This is perhaps the deepest pattern of all. We all carry a story about who we are, a narrative constructed from our past, our experiences, our successes and failures, our relationships, our traumas. This story feels like our identity. It feels like who we fundamentally are. But Tolle points to something radical. The story is not who you are. It is a mental construction, a collection of thoughts that you have identified with. The most common false self-identifications have to do with possessions, the work you do, social status and recognition, knowledge and education, physical appearance, special abilities, relationships, personal and family history, belief systems, and often nationalistic, racial, religious, and other collective identifications. None of these is you. You are the awareness in which all of this appears, the awareness that witnesses the story without being limited to it. As this recognition deepens, a remarkable freedom emerges. You can have a history without being defined by it. You can play roles without forgetting that you are the actor, not the character. You can hold your story lightly, appreciating it as part of your human experience, without mistaking it for your ultimate identity. This does not mean you forget your past or pretend it did not happen. It means you no longer let it determine who you are now. It means you recognize that in this present moment, you are free, that the person you were yesterday does not have to be the person you are today, that the story can evolve, can transform, can even be completely rewritten, because you are not the story. You are that which is aware of the story. This is the deepest liberation, and it is available to you right now, in this very moment. I want to share something that might help you understand why this particular pattern is so challenging to release. The story we tell about ourselves is not just a passive narrative. It is actively constructed and reinforced every day. Every time you introduce yourself to someone, you tell part of the story. Every time you explain why you behave a certain way, you reinforce the story. Every time you think about what you want in life based on what you have experienced, the story deepens its roots. The mind false self has a vested interest in maintaining this story because the story is the mind false self. Without the story, what remains? This question can feel terrifying to the mind false self, but to awareness, it is the doorway to freedom. What remains when the story lets go is not nothing. It is not emptiness in the negative sense. What remains is being itself, pure presence, awareness without object, the eternal now that has always been your true home. And from this place of being, you can still have a story. You can still have a history, a name, preferences, relationships, but they become like clothes you wear rather than the skin you think you are. You can change them. You can take them off. You can appreciate them without being bound by them. This is true freedom. Not freedom from having a human life, but freedom within your human life. Now, I want to be very clear about something important. These habits do not disappear overnight. Tolle himself says that conditioned patterns have their momentum and may act out for quite a while, even as presence is arising. Some people, as they become more aware, begin to think they are getting worse. They see more of their mind false self, more of their patterns, more of their unconsciousness. But this is actually a sign of progress. You are not getting worse. You are simply becoming more conscious of what has already been there for many years. The mind false self patterns were running unconsciously before. Now you are seeing them. And in seeing them, you are beginning to transcend them. This is why Tolle advises not to take the mind false self too seriously. When you detect mind false self behavior in yourself, smile. Do not create another layer of mind false self by feeling guilty or ashamed about your mind false self. Simply notice, simply bring presence to what is arising, and let the light of awareness do its work. Because here is the beautiful truth: you do not have to forcefully let go of these habits. You do not have to fight against them. You do not have to use willpower to suppress them. The letting go happens naturally as awareness grows. As presence becomes more established, these patterns simply lose their power. They may still arise, but they no longer run your life. They may still appear, but you no longer identify with them completely. They become like clouds passing through the sky of your awareness, present for a moment, then gone, no longer defining who you are. This is the promise of awakening. Not that you become a perfect person who never experiences mind false self, but that you become so established in presence that the mind false self no longer controls you. That these 7 habits, and many others, naturally let go as you return again and again to the now. So if you recognized yourself in any of these patterns, do not despair. Do not add judgment to what is already present. Simply notice. Simply bring awareness and trust the process. Because the very fact that you can see these patterns means that you are already beyond them in some fundamental way. The mind false self cannot see itself. Only awareness can. And that awareness is who you truly are. As you continue on this journey, be patient with yourself. These patterns developed over decades. They will not dissolve in a day, but they will dissolve, layer by layer, moment by moment, as you keep choosing presence over identification with thought, as you keep choosing awareness over unconsciousness, as you keep choosing now over past and future. This is the path, and it is available to everyone, not just to special people, not just to those who have had dramatic awakenings, but to anyone who is willing to look honestly at themselves, anyone who is willing to see the patterns without defending them, anyone who is willing to make the present moment their friend, because as Eckhart Tolle so wisely states, the decision to befriend the present moment, that's truly the end of the mind, the false self, not the end of the mind appearing. Of course not. But the end of it being your master, your puppeteer, the end of being controlled by those old worn-out habits, those patterns you never consciously chose, the end of living life on autopilot, just going through the motions. It's the beginning of true freedom, genuine liberation, the beginning of a life lived from presence, from that still small voice within, rather than from old conditioning, the beginning of finally discovering who you really are, beyond all those behaviors you thought defined you, the labels you plastered on yourself. This is what awaits you, Just on the other side of these ingrained patterns, not just a better, shinier version of your story with a few happy chapters thrown in, but freedom from the story altogether, releasing the whole narrative. Not a better mind or false self. Let's be honest, that's just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, but liberation from the tyranny, the relentless dictatorship of the mind. Not a better life in the conventional sense. Bigger house, fancier car, more Instagram followers. That's all fleeting, but something far more profound. Something that resonates deep within your soul. A peace that isn't dependent on circumstances. It doesn't waver with the ups and downs of life. A joy that arises from simply being, from the sheer miracle of existence. A love that flows naturally, effortlessly, when the barriers, the defenses of the mind are lowered. This is your birthright. You were born deserving of this. This is what you are moving toward, whether you consciously realize it or not. It's the silent pull of your heart. Every pattern you release, every habit you break free from, brings you closer to that truth. Every behavior that falls away, like autumn leaves falling from a tree, reveals more of who you truly are. And who you truly are is beyond anything the mind could ever imagine. It's unfathomable to the intellect. It is the awareness, the pure consciousness, that animates all life, that breathes through everything, the presence that has no beginning and no end, eternal and unwavering, the being that you have always been, patiently waiting beneath all the layers of conditioning, the noise and the chatter. May you continue to awaken, to peel back the layers of illusion. May these habits, these outdated ways of being, continue to fall away, like shedding an old skin, and may you discover, more deeply each and every day, the freedom that is your authentic self, your true nature. That is the promise of this path, the path of awareness. And it is available to you right now, this very second, not in some distant future, when you've figured it all out, not after you have perfected yourself, because perfection is a myth, but right now, in this very moment, just as you are. Simply notice. Pay attention to what's happening within and around you. Simply be present. Anchor yourself in the now, and let everything that is not essential, everything that is not you, naturally fall away, like releasing a clenched fist, because what remains, when all the patterns dissolve, is more beautiful, more peaceful, more alive than anything the mind could have ever imagined or promised. What remains is you, the essence of who you are, your true self, shining through. The awareness that has been here all along, patiently waiting to be recognized, like a hidden treasure, waiting for you to come home, to your own heart. And home is here, right where you are. Home is now, this very instant. Home is who you already are, always have been, and always will be.